The grave was a perfect square cut from the earth, a dark mouth waiting to be fed. Around it stood the pillars of Austin society, their black suits and dresses a stark contrast to the manicured, unnaturally green grass of the cemetery. It was 2025, and even grief had a corporate sponsor. The air smelled of expensive lilies and hypocrisy. At the center of it all, beside the polished mahogany casket of Robert Vance, titan of industry, sat his widow. Elizabeth Vance, at 72, was a statue carved from ice. Her back was ramrod straight. Her gloved hands were folded in her lap. Her face, framed by a severe black hat, was a mask of placid stone. While others dabbed their eyes with silk handkerchiefs and choked back performative sobs, Elizabeth simply watched. She had not shed a single tear. Not when they lowered the casket. Not when the first handful of dirt struck the lid with a hollow thud. She felt nothing but a profound, chilling sense of release. 45 years of marriage had ended not with a bang or even a whimper, but with the quiet, final click of a closing door. Later, the river of black cars flowed back to the Vance estate, a sprawling mansion that was more museum than home. It was a monument to Robert's success, filled with art he'd purchased by the yard and furniture too precious to be sat on. Elizabeth had lived within these walls for nearly half a century, and had never once felt at home. The wake was a muted affair, a sea of hushed whispers and clinking glasses. Elizabeth stood near the grand fireplace, a ghost in her own life, as guests offered condolences that sounded like memorized lines. They spoke of Robert's genius, his vision, his legacy. They spoke of a man she had never truly known. Or rather, a man whose public facade was the most elaborate fiction he had ever constructed. Her son, David, a man of 45 who still wore the anxious expression of a boy desperate for his father's approval, moved through the crowd with his wife, Chloe. Chloe, 42, was immaculate, her grief as tailored and expensive as her black Chanel suit. She was a woman who saw life as a series of strategic acquisitions, and her marriage to David had been her greatest coup. Elizabeth watched as Chloe paused with a small group of women, fellow wives of industry. Chloe gestured vaguely with her champagne flute in Elizabeth's direction, her voice a carefully calibrated stage whisper, just loud enough to carry. "It's a lot of house for one person," Chloe said, a wrinkle of performative concern on her brow. "A terrible burden, really." She took a delicate sip. "Honestly, David and I have been carrying her financially for years. It's been a challenge." She let the words hang in the air, a drop of poison in the quiet room. A freelooper in her own home, if you think about it. The words struck Elizabeth with the force of a physical blow, a hot flush of shame and fury. Emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in decades rose in her chest. She saw the sideways glances from the women, the pity mixed with a certain cruel satisfaction. In that moment, she was no longer the widow of a titan. She was a problem, a line item on a budget, an inconvenience. David, standing nearby, heard it. Elizabeth saw the flicker of discomfort in his eyes, the way his shoulders tensed. But he did nothing. He offered his mother a weak, watery smile and turned back to his conversation, his silence a deafening confirmation of his wife's cruelty. He had always been weak, a pale imitation of his father's blustering confidence. The last of the mourners finally departed, leaving a silence in the house that was heavier than the drone of conversation had been. The air was thick with the scent of wilted flowers and the ghost of Robert Vance. Chloe's words echoed in the cavernous space. A freelooper. Asterisk. David and Chloe found her in the library, staring at the rows of leather-bound books Robert had never read. Chloe's approach was direct, stripped of the pretense of grief. She was all business now. "Mother Vance," she began, her tone gentle but firm, the way one speaks to a child or an invalid. "David and I have been talking. We're worried about you. Here all alone." David shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his gaze fixed on a Persian rug. It's a big place, Mom. Too much to keep up with. Chloe slid an iPad onto the polished mahogany table between them. On the screen, a video began to play. Sunday-drenched courtyards. Smiling seniors playing bridge. A pristine dining hall with white tablecloths. A cheerful voice narrated the amenities of Silver Meadows, a luxury assisted living community. It's the best, Chloe said, her voice bright and brittle. 5-star dining, on-site medical staff, social activities. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing. We think it's time to sell the house, David mumbled, the words rushing out as if he were afraid they'd get stuck in his throat. Legally, it passed to me and Chloe now. Dad's will was very clear. Of course it was. Robert had made sure of that. He had made sure of everything. Chloe swiped through photos of a small, beige apartment. A kitchenette, a walk-in shower with a grab bar, a window overlooking a parking lot. We've already had a realtor do a preliminary valuation. The market in Austin is incredible right now. This is the logical next step for everyone. Freeloader. Burden. Logical next step. Asterisk. The words swirled in Elizabeth's mind. A vortex of humiliation. They weren't asking her. They were telling her. This was not a proposal. It was a verdict. They had waited for Robert's body to be in the ground for less than a day before beginning the process of her erasure. She looked from her son's averted eyes to her daughter in Law's predatory smile. She saw her future laid out before her. A sterile room, a managed life, a slow, dignified fade into nothingness. For 45 years, she had been silent. She had endured. She had survived by making herself small, by swallowing her pride, her ambition, her very self. But the man she had made that silent pact with was gone. The rules had changed. A lifetime of suppressed rage began to stir, a sleeping dragon awakening in the cavern of her soul. The first wisp of smoke escaped her lips. Elizabeth looked directly at Chloe, her gaze as cold and hard as a diamond. She ignored the iPad, ignored her son's shuffling discomfort. She focused all her energy, all her long-dormant will, into a single, unyielding word. Number. The word was quiet, but it landed in the silent room with the force of a slammed door. Chloe's smile faltered. David flinched as if he'd been struck. It was the first spark of a rebellion they could not possibly comprehend. A war had been declared, and they didn't even know they were on a battlefield. They left, sputtering about her being emotional, overtired from the day's events. They would talk again tomorrow, they said, when she was thinking more clearly. But Elizabeth was thinking more clearly than she had in 45 years. Alone, she walked the halls of the house. The silence was no longer heavy. It was hers. Every step echoed on the cold marble floors. This was not a home. It had always been a prison. Just a beautifully decorated one. Each object was a monument to her slow, methodical erasure. She paused in the grand entryway, her hand hovering over a small, impressionist painting of a Parisian street scene. It was the first piece of fine art Robert had bought after the initial success of Vance Innovations. She remembered the day it arrived. Flashback. The house. 35 years ago. The air smells of fresh paint and new money. A younger Elizabeth, her face still open and hopeful, is uncrating the painting. Asterisk. Asterisk. It's lovely, Robert, she says. Her voice genuine. But did it have to be so expensive? We could have used that money to expand the secondary polymer research. Asterisk. Robert, larger than life in a bespoke suit, laughs. It's a dismissive, booming sound. He plucks the painting from her hands and hangs it on the wall. Asterisk. Lizzie, my dear, he says, patting her on the head as one would a clever dog. You worry about the house. Let me worry about the business. Your little chemistry experiments are a wonderful hobby, a great way to keep your mind occupied. But this, he gestures around the opulent hall, this is the real world. This is what matters. Asterisk. A hobby. That's what he had called it. Her little chemistry experiments. She moved on, into his study. The room still smelled of his cigars and self-importance. On the wall, framed and under glass, was the original patent for plastics, the revolutionary biodegradable polymer that had launched Vance innovations into the stratosphere. His name was on it. Robert Vance, inventor. A lie, set in ink and enshrined on the wall. Her fire. His name. Her gaze fell on the heavy oak desk. She remembered standing on the other side of it years ago, feeling like a child asking for a treat. Flashback. 10 years into the marriage. The company is a giant. Elizabeth stands before the desk, a small ledger in her hand. Asterisk. Robert, I was just looking at the household accounts, she begins, her voice hesitant. She has learned to be careful, to frame every request as a gentle suggestion. The allowance you give me, it doesn't quite cover everything, especially with the caterers for the investor parties. Asterisk. Robert doesn't even look up from his paperwork. He scrawls his signature on a check with a flourish. An allowance? He scoffs, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. Most women would be thrilled. You live in this house. You drive a new car every 2 years. You wear clothes I pay for. What more could you possibly need money for? He finally looks at her, his eyes cold and appraising. Don't be greedy, Elizabeth. It's unbecoming. Asterisk. He had systematically stripped her of all agency. Every decision, from the brand of coffee in the kitchen to the stocks in their portfolio, was his. She was a curator of his life, a high-class housekeeper. He had isolated her too. She walked past the telephone on a side table. A sleek, modern device. But in her mind, she saw the old rotary phone that had sat there for years. Flashback. 20 years ago. Elizabeth is on the phone, laughing with her old college roommate, a fellow chemical engineer named Sarah. I know, it sounds crazy, Elizabeth is saying, her voice alive with an old spark, but if you tweak the cross-linking agent, I think you could increase the tensile strength by another 15% without affecting the degradation timeline. Asterisk. Robert enters the room. He doesn't say a word. He simply stands there, watching her, his presence a cold weight. Elizabeth's laughter falters. Her posture changes. Asterisk. I have to go, Sarah, she says, her voice now flat. Robert's home. Later that evening, over a silent dinner, Robert had remarked casually that Sarah sounds like a bad influence, always filling your head with silly ideas from the past. A woman's place is here, supporting her husband's career, not gossiping about tensile strength. Asterisk. She never received another call from Sarah. The message had been sent and received. One by one, the connections to her old life, to the brilliant, ambitious woman she had once been, were severed. He had built this cage around her, bar by gilded bar, and convinced her it was a castle, built with a fortune she had created, a world-changing formula she had perfected in a small university lab, a discovery he had stolen and claimed as his own. The house was not a home. It was a crime scene. And for the first time, standing in the echoing silence, Elizabeth didn't feel like a prisoner. She felt like an investigator. The cold, quiet fury that had begun to simmer in the library was now a low, steady flame. They thought she was a relic, a fragile old woman to be packed away in a box. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They had forgotten that before she was Mrs. Robert Vance, she was Elizabeth. And she was a creator of things far more complex and far more volatile than a biodegradable polymer. 2 days passed in a tense, cold quiet. Elizabeth moved through the house with a new sense of purpose, her mind a whirlwind of calculations and possibilities. She ate little, slept less. She was gathering her strength, assessing her position. She knew David and Chloe would be back. She knew the no was only the opening salvo. They returned on a Tuesday afternoon. The pretense of concern was gone, replaced by a thin, brittle layer of impatience. Chloe led the charge, her heels clicking on the marble floor like tiny hammers. David trailed in her wake, his face a mask of strained resolve. "We need to talk," Chloe announced, not waiting for an invitation to sit. She placed her designer handbag on the coffee table with a definitive thud. "We were very disappointed with your reaction the other day, Mom," David said, his voice attempting a sternness that his posture betrayed. "We're just trying to do what's best. What Dad would have wanted. What Robert would have wanted," Elizabeth repeated. Her voice, dangerously soft, was control. "It seems he passed that particular trait on." Chloe's eyes narrowed. "This isn't a debate. This is a reality. You are not capable of managing this estate or your own affairs. And frankly, we don't have the time or the resources to do it for you." She reached into her handbag and pulled out a folded sheaf of papers. They were old, the creases soft, the paper yellowed at the edges. She unfolded it and spread it on the table. A legal document. "Do you remember this, Elizabeth?" Chloe asked, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness. "You signed it about 10 years ago. A durable power of attorney." Elizabeth stared at the document. She remembered, vaguely. Robert was going in for what he'd called a minor heart procedure. "A simple angioplasty," he'd said. "Nothing to worry about." Flashback. A sterile lawyer's office. The air smells of paper and polish. Robert is jovial, expansive. He puts an arm around Elizabeth. Asterisk. Asterisk. "It's just a formality, Lizzie," he'd said, his voice a comforting rumble. "A precaution. While I'm under, someone needs to be able to sign a check if a bill comes due. You trust me, don't you?" Asterisk. She had. Blindly. She'd signed where the lawyer, a slick young man named Marcus Thorne, had indicated. Her signature, younger then, more fluid, looped across the bottom of the page. It was an act of trust, an act of love, she'd thought at the time. Asterisk. Now, in the harsh light of the present, she saw it for what it was. Not a precaution, a weapon, forged 10 years ago, waiting patiently to be used against her. "Our lawyer has reviewed it," Chloe continued, her voice hardening into a blade. "It's ironclad. It gives David, as Robert's heir, full authority over your financial and medical decisions. If you are deemed unwilling or unable to act in your own best interest." David finally looked at her, his eyes filled with a miserable cocktail of guilt and determination. "We can have you declared incompetent, Mom. We don't want to. It would be messy. Public. The doctors would have to be involved. There would be evaluations." He swallowed hard. "Just sign the papers for Silver Meadows. Make this easy on everyone." The threat hung in the air, ugly and suffocating. They would paint her as a senile old woman, confused and defiant. They would use the power she had given them in good faith to strip her of everything. Her home, her dignity, her mind. Chloe leaned forward, her face a mask of triumph. She delivered the final, killing blow. "Sign the papers, Elizabeth," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, laced with venom, "or we will use this document to take control of everything. We will sell this house, liquidate every asset tied to your name, and place you in a state-run facility. We will make sure you have nothing. Not a dime. Not a memory. Nothing." The room was silent. Elizabeth looked at the yellowed paper on the table. She looked at her son, a stranger wearing a familiar face. She looked at his wife, a vulture circling what it believed to be a dying animal. They thought this was checkmate. They thought they had her trapped, her king cornered on the board. They saw the old paper, the legal jargon, the signatures. They saw a cage, but they didn't see the years of silent observation, the decades of watching Robert manipulate, strategize, and conquer. They didn't know that while he was building his empire in public, she had been studying his methods in private. They thought they were threatening a frail old woman in a library. They had no idea they were standing in the dragon's lair. The fear she should have felt was absent. The despair, the helplessness, it wasn't there. In its place, the low, steady flame of her anger roared into an inferno. It burned away the last vestiges of the meek, compliant wife she had pretended to be for so long. She looked at the power of attorney. A weapon, yes. But every weapon has a weakness. Every prison has a key. And they had just made a fatal error. They had shown her their entire strategy. They had mistaken her silence for submission. And in doing so, they had just handed her the very tool she needed to begin her war. Elizabeth slowly raised her eyes from the document and met Chloe's triumphant gaze. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes was enough. It was a look that said the game was just beginning, and it was her turn to move. The silence in the house was a weapon. It was the same silence Robert had used for 50 years. A heavy blanket to smother argument, to suffocate dissent. After David and Chloe had left, their threats hanging in the air like poison gas, the silence returned, deeper and more menacing than ever before. For an hour, Elizabeth sat in the living room, a statue carved from grief and fury. She looked at her hands, the skin thin and spotted with age, but the bones beneath were strong. They were the hands of a chemist, the hands of a builder. They had been idle for too long. She rose, her movements stiff but deliberate, and walked to the small antique secretary desk in the corner. Her fingers, trembling just slightly, dialed a number she knew by heart. It rang 3 times before a bright, young voice answered. "Grandma, is everything okay?" Elizabeth took a steadying breath. "Ava, my dear. I'm fine. I hope I'm not interrupting your studies." "Never. I was just procrastinating on a torts brief." "What's up?" "You sound different." "Different. Yes, that was the word. I need your help, Ava. A favor. A legal one." A pause on the other end. Ava's voice became more focused, the law student in her taking over. "Okay. Of course. What kind of help?" "I need to understand something." Elizabeth chose her words as carefully as if she were measuring reagents. What does it take to challenge a power of attorney? Specifically, one that was signed, under duress, coercive circumstances. She let the words hang there, tasting the acid of them on her tongue. Ava was silent for a long moment. Elizabeth could hear the soft tapping of a keyboard in the background. "Grandma, this is a serious question. Is someone pressuring you? Is it David? That woman he married?" "I'm just exploring a hypothetical," Elizabeth lied, the falsehood feeling brittle and thin. An academic curiosity. "Grandma, I've seen your book club list. You're not curious about durable power of attorney. Talk to me. What did they do?" Elizabeth felt a crack in her composure. A single hot tear traced a path down her wrinkled cheek. She wiped it away angrily. "They want to put me in a home, Ava. They want to sell the house. They have a piece of paper I signed over a decade ago. A paper your grandfather told me was just a formality. They said they'll use it to declare me incompetent." The furious sound of typing stopped. "Those bastards," Ava breathed. the word a venomous dart. Okay. Okay, Grandma. Don't worry. A POA signed under coercion, especially with a conflict of interest from the witnesses or notary, is highly contestable. It's not a nuclear option for them. It's a messy, expensive court battle. I can pull every precedent, every statute in Texas. We can fight this. A wave of relief, so potent it made her dizzy, washed over Elizabeth. Thank you, Ava. That's the first thing. There's a second. It might sound strange. After what you just told me, nothing sounds strange. I need you to find the original patent documents from the early 1980s for plastics. Another pause. This one was filled with confusion. Plastics, the company's flagship product. Why? I have my reasons. I need to see the filing. The inventor listed, the date, the chemical abstract. Everything. Can you access those records through the university? Yeah, the USPTO database is public, but the university has better search tools. I can find it. Grandma, what's this really about? Elizabeth looked around the opulent room, at the furniture Robert had chosen, the art he had bought. A gilded cage built from a stolen fire. It's about setting a record straight, my dear. A very, very old record. All right, Ava said, her voice now a low, determined hum. I'm on it. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. Don't even talk to them without me. I'll call you as soon as I have something. I love you, Grandma. I love you too, Ava. Elizabeth hung up the phone. The house was still silent, but it was no longer a weapon used against her. Now, it was a sound stage, waiting for the first act to begin. Later that night, in her small Austin apartment surrounded by stacks of textbooks, Ava Chen powered on her laptop. Her screen was split. On one side, the formidable interface of the LexisNexis legal database. On the other, the United States Patent and Trademark Office search portal. But first, she opened a third application, TikTok. She hit record, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. She kept her voice to a whisper. Okay, so, new project. Not for a class. This one's personal. We're going to be doing a case study. An exploration of elder law, specifically financial abuse, and contested power of attorney. The client is, let's call her Jane Doe. Jane is a widow in her 70s. Her son and daughter-in-law are attempting to use a decade-old POA to institutionalize her and seize her assets. Our first step is to research the validity of the document itself. I have a feeling the execution of this document was shady. Let's dig in. She saved the video to her private account. The first entry in a diary of a coming war. Number Vance Vindication was a hashtag that didn't exist yet, but the first stone had been cast into the water. After the call with Ava, Elizabeth walked from the living room into the grand hallway, her hand trailing along the cold, imported marble of a console table. Each object in this house was a monument to a life that wasn't hers, a life built on her silence. She continued through the cavernous dining room. Past the kitchen, Chloe had remodeled with sterile white countertops and stainless steel appliances that hummed with an alien energy. Her destination was the pantry. To any observer, it was a large, well-stocked walk-in pantry, a relic of the home's original design. One wall was lined floor to ceiling with shelves holding jars of preserves she hadn't made, bags of flour she never used, tins of exotic spices she'd never opened. It was a perfect piece of domestic scenery. It was also a lie. Elizabeth reached behind a large decorative tin of Italian olive oil on the third shelf. Her fingers found not wood, but a small, flush-mounted biometric scanner. She pressed her thumb against it. There was no sound, but a faint green light blinked once. Then, She pushed the third canning jar from the left jar of spiced peaches from 1998. It wasn't a jar. It was a disguised knob. She turned it a quarter turn to the right. With a barely audible sigh of pneumatics, the entire wall of shelves swung inward, revealing not a hidden safe, but a room. A cavern of cool blue light. This was her world. This was Athena's lair. For 15 years, this room had been her sanctuary and her university. The air was cool, chilled by a silent, dedicated cooling system for the humming racks of computer servers that lined one wall. 3 massive, curved monitors formed a command and control cockpit on a sleek, minimalist desk. A high-end ergonomic chair, the only truly comfortable piece of furniture she owned, sat waiting for her. She closed the heavy, soundproof door behind her. The oppressive silence of the house was replaced by the quiet, powerful hum of enterprise-grade technology. The timid, grieving widow persona fell away from her like a snake shedding its skin. Here, she was not Elizabeth Vance, the relic. She was Athena, a ghost in the machine, a name she'd chosen for its symbolism of wisdom, strategy, and righteous warfare. She sat in her chair, the monitors flickering to life, recognizing her presence. One screen displayed a cascade of real-time stock market data, the ticker for Vance Innovations, VNC, highlighted in its own dedicated window. It was trading flat. For now, another screen showed encrypted communication channels, secure, untraceable chat rooms where she conversed with brokers in Zurich and financial analysts in Hong Kong, none of whom knew her as anything other than the inscrutable, brilliant mind behind Phoenix Holdingshire, untraceable offshore shell corporation, registered in the Cayman Islands. A phoenix, rising from the ashes of a life burned to the ground. The third screen was her portal. Here, she had taught herself everything. She started with basic coding, then moved to network security, ethical hacking, and the complex predatory dance of algorithmic trading. She'd spent thousands of hours, fueled by coffee and a cold, simmering rage, devouring tutorials, infiltrating forums, and practicing on sandbox systems until the digital world felt more real to her than the one outside the pantry door. She hadn't just been watching Vance Innovations. She had been hunting. Using Phoenix Holdings, she began buying VNC stock a decade ago. Small amounts at first, routed through so many different brokers and funds that the purchases were nothing more than background noise on the market. But they accumulated. Her portfolio was now a thing of quiet, immense power. She wasn't a majority shareholder yet, but she was a significant one. An anonymous, powerful player whose existence, the board whose existence her own son had no idea about. She reviewed the day's trades, her expression sharp and analytical. She saw the algorithms she had designed executing microtrades, skimming fractions of a cent from market fluctuations, adding slowly, inexorably to her war chest. She had watched David's ascent to CEO after Robert's health began to fail. She had access to the company's internal servers, a backdoor she had engineered herself years ago. She had read his emails, seen his presentations, watched his quarterly reports. He was a passable manager, good at repeating his father's old mantras, but he lacked vision. He lacked ruthlessness. He was a caretaker, not a king, and he was about to face a storm he couldn't possibly imagine. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, bringing up a file encrypted with a key so complex it would take a government supercomputer a century to crack. The file was labeled Reckoning. Inside were a dozen subfolders, each one a potential line of attack. The first was labeled Environmental. She opened it. It was time to see if the cub still had his father's fangs. Days bled into one another. On the surface, Elizabeth maintained her routine. She read in the garden. She ate her simple meals in the cavernous kitchen. She politely declined Chloe's passive-aggressive offers to help her pack a few things. But every night she would retreat to her lair, monitoring, planning, waiting. The call from Ava came on a Thursday afternoon. "Grandma, I've got something," Ava said, her voice tight with excitement and anger. "Multiple things. You sitting down?" "I'm always sitting down, dear," Elizabeth said dryly. "Okay, first, the power of attorney. I got a copy of the executed document from the county clerk's office. You were right to be suspicious. Guess who the notary public was?" Elizabeth already knew the answer. "Let me guess. Marcus Thorne." "Bingo," Ava spat. "Robert's personal attorney and the company's lead counsel for 30 years. It's the most blatant conflict of interest I've ever seen. A lawyer notarizing a document for his own client that gives his client's family power. It stinks to high heaven. Any decent judge would throw this out, or at the very least, subject it to intense scrutiny. That's our legal foothold. We can file a motion to invalidate it tomorrow." "Good," Elizabeth said, a grim satisfaction settling in. "What else?" "This is the big one, Grandma. The patent for plastics. Filed August 1980. Inventor of record, Robert M. Vance. Just him. No co-inventors." Elizabeth's heart gave a painful thud. The clinical confirmation of a 50-year-old crime. "But here's where it gets wild," Ava continued, her voice dropping. "I started digging into academic databases. Science journals, university archives, things from that period. It took me forever. I was using keyword searches like biodegradable polymer, lactic acid synthesis, plasticizer formulas. And then I found it." Elizabeth held her breath. "It's a research paper, published in the Journal of Applied Polymer Science. The title is A Novel Biocompatible Thermoplastic via Catalytic Ring Opening Polymerization. It describes a formula for a polymer that is, well, Grandma, it's chemically almost identical to the abstract in the plastics patent. A few cosmetic differences in the catalyst description, but it's the same breakthrough." "Who was the author?" Elizabeth asked, her voice a whisper. "The sole author," Ava said. Her voice, trembling with the magnitude of her discovery, was Elizabeth Sinclair. "Your maiden name. It was published in May of 1980, 3 months before the patent was filed, and 1 month before you married Robert Vance." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He hadn't even waited. "There's more," Ava said. "I found a retraction notice in a later issue of the journal. It just says the paper was withdrawn by the author. No explanation given. Grandma. He stole it. That son of a bitch, he stole your work and built an empire on it." Elizabeth closed her eyes, the phantom smell of smoke and burnt chemicals filling her nostrils. The memory of the fire, of Robert's false comfort, was as vivid as yesterday. "Yes, dear," she said, her voice unnaturally calm. "Yes, he did." "What do we do?" Ava demanded. "We go to the press. We sue the estate. This changes everything." "Patience, Ava," Elizabeth said, the strategist taking over. "A retracted paper from 40 years ago against the weight of the Vance Empire? It's our word against a ghost's. We need more. For now, this is our secret. Your discovery is the key, but we don't put it in the lock just yet." That night, Athena went to work. She wasn't interested in a messy public lawsuit based on a 40-year-old academic paper. Not yet. She wanted to test the cage, to rattle the bars and see how the animals inside would react. In her command center, she pulled up the environmental folder. Inside was a collection of internal Vance Innovations documents she had siphoned from their servers over the years. Among them was a series of internal memos from the company's compliance department to David's office. They detailed, in stark terms, that the company's official environmental impact reports on plastics manufacturing byproducts were knowingly falsified. The actual runoff was significantly more toxic than they reported to the EPA, a fact they had been concealing for at least 5 years to avoid costly upgrades to their processing plants. She composed a short, anonymous message. It was a masterclass in concise destruction. Subject: VNC greenwashing. To whom it may concern, asterisk. Vance Innovations has been lying to the EPA and its investors for years. Plastics byproduct runoff toxicity levels are 50% higher than reported. See attached internal memos from 2021-2023. They chose profit over planet. Make them pay. Asterisk. She attached the 3 most damning memos, stripped of all metadata. Then, using a series of layered VPNs and routing her connection through servers in Estonia, Brazil, and Malaysia, she sent the email. The recipient was not a major news network. It was a financial blogger on Twitter, a bulldog with 1 million followers known for his anti-corporate crusade and his skill at dissecting SEC filings. He was a digital piranha who would smell blood in the water. She hit send. Then she leaned back in her chair. All 3 monitors now focused on one thing: market data. She watched the VNC ticker. She watched Twitter. She watched the financial news feeds. For an hour, nothing. Then, it started. A single tweet from the blogger. Asterisk. Whoa. Just received a very credible tip. Internal docs re. Vance Innovations, $VNC. Looks like their green plastic is poisoning rivers. EPA might want to see this. Story coming. Asterisk. It was like dropping a match into a fireworks factory. The tweet was retweeted hundreds, then thousands of times. Number Vance poison began to trend. Financial news sites, smelling a scandal, started picking it up. On her screen, the VNC ticker flickered from green to red. Down 1%. Down 2.5%. CNBC cut to a breaking news report. A stern-faced anchor talked about troubling, unconfirmed allegations. Down 4%. A notification popped up. David Vance had just released a statement. These baseless accusations from an anonymous source are a malicious attempt to manipulate our stock. We stand by our sterling environmental record. The market didn't believe him. By the time the closing bell rang, Vance Innovations stock was down 5.1%, a paper loss of hundreds of millions of dollars. In her hidden lair, Elizabeth watched the final number settle on her screen. A small, cold smile touched her lips. It wasn't a catastrophe. It was a message. A precise, surgical strike. A warning shot fired from the shadows. She had rattled the cage. Now she would wait and see what the animals did next. As she powered down her systems, her eyes fell on a framed photograph on a small shelf in the corner of the lathe, only personal item in the room. It was a picture of a much younger woman, with bright, hopeful eyes and dark hair, standing proudly in front of a whiteboard covered in chemical equations. Elizabeth Sinclair. Before the fire, before the theft, before the long, cold winter of her marriage. The smile faded from her face, replaced by the memory of fire. The past wasn't just a memory, it was fuel, the scent of ozone and burnt sugar. That was the first thing she remembered. A young, vibrant Elizabeth, her hair tied back in a messy bun, stood in her makeshift lava converted garage filled with beakers, burners, and the heady aroma of scientific possibility. She held up a small, translucent sheet of what looked like flexible glass. It was warm to the touch. "See, Robert?" she said, her voice alive with the thrill of creation. She was 28 years old, and she was about to change the world. It's the polymerization process. If you control the chiral centers of the lactic acid monomer before the ring opening, you get this. It's as strong as petroleum-based plastic, but put it in a landfill, and microbes will break it down into water and CO2 in under a year. It's clean. Robert, handsome and sharp in a tailored suit that seemed out of place in the garage, took the sample from her. He turned it over in his hands. Elizabeth looked at his face, expecting to see the pride, the shared joy of a partner. Instead, she saw something else flicker in his eyes. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but it was there. It wasn't pride. It was appraisal. The way a miner looks at a raw, uncut diamond. It was the cold, calculating glint of pure, unadulterated greed. "It's incredible, Lizzie," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Truly, you're a genius." He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "You need to be careful with this. A formula this valuable, people would kill for it." He handed the sample back, his fingers brushing hers. His touch was cold. "Tell me again about the catalyst." "The tin octoate. How do you stabilize it?" She spent the next hour explaining everything. The precise temperatures, the exact sequence of chemical introductions, the delicate balance of the formula. She poured out the secrets of her mind, the fruits of 5 years of relentless work, offering them up like a gift to the man she loved. He listened with rapt attention, nodding, asking sharp, intelligent questions. He memorized every word. A week later, she came home from grocery shopping to the sight of fire trucks outside her house. It wasn't a blaze. It was a small, contained fire, the fire department said. An electrical short from a faulty power strip in the garage. The damage was localized but absolute. Her lab was a ruin of blackened wood, melted plastic, and shattered glass. Her notebooks, filled with years of research, calculations, and failed experiments, were a pile of sodden, black ash on the concrete floor. Everything was gone. Robert was there, holding her as she stared at the wreckage, her body trembling with shock. He wrapped his arms around her, a perfect portrait of a comforting husband. "Shh, my love, it's all right," he murmured into her hair, his voice thick with false sympathy. "It's all just things. We can buy you new beakers, a new workspace." He stroked her back. "Don't you worry about these little hobbies. The important thing is that you're safe." Hobbies. The word hit her like a physical blow. All her passion, her intellect, her world-changing discovery reduced to a little hobby. As she sagged against him, a terrible, cold clarity cut through her grief. The fire wasn't an accident. The perfect, targeted destruction. The strange glint in his eye a week earlier. He hadn't just watched her dream burn. He had lit the match. And as he held her, whispering comforting lies, she knew with sickening certainty that her formula, her life's work, was safe and sound, locked away behind the greedy ambition in his eyes, ready to be filed under his name. Robert M. Vance. Inventor. Liar. Thief. That was the day Elizabeth Sinclair died, and Mrs. Robert Vance was born. That was the day the gilded cage was forged, built on an original sin of stolen fire. And in the silent, hidden command center, 45 years later, the woman who now called herself Athena looked at the ashes of that memory and knew, with that same chilling clarity, that the debt was long past due, and she was here to collect. The harsh fluorescent lights of Marcus Thorne's office felt like an interrogation. They bleached the colour from Chloe's face, leaving only the sharp angles of her panic. David was pacing, his tie loosened, his hand running through his hair again and again, a gesture of a man watching his inheritance burn. 5%, David said, his voice a low, strangled thing. 5% in a day. On an anonymous leak. What the hell was it? An environmental report from a decade ago? Who cares about that? The market cares, David, Marcus said, his voice smooth, professional, a layer of expensive calm over a bedrock of opportunism. He sat behind his vast mahogany desk, a fortress of billable hours. Perception is reality. An anonymous leak suggests instability. It suggests a vulnerability. And right now, Vance Innovations is bleeding from a self-inflicted wound. Oh, Chloe stopped filing her nails, the sound of the emery board grating on David's last nerve. He means your mother, darling, she said, her voice dripping with venom. This has her fingerprints all over it. The timing is too perfect. My mother doesn't know how to send a text, let alone orchestrate a targeted leak to tank a multi-billion-dollar company. David snapped. Doesn't she? Chloe stood up, her movements sleek and predatory. She was a chemical engineer, David. You seem to forget that. You think she just sat in that house knitting for 50 years. She's not senile. She's malicious. Marcus steepled his fingers. Chloe has a point, David. Your mother's refusal to cooperate. Her sudden intransigence. It coincides perfectly with this attack on the company. We cannot afford to look weak. We need to control the narrative. And to do that, we need to control her. David stopped pacing. He looked from his wife's hard, determined face to his lawyer's cool, calculating one. Control her? What are you suggesting? The power of attorney, Marcus said, sliding a folder across the desk. The one she signed 12 years ago. It's ironclad. We file a petition. We state, under advisement from medical professionals we will of course provide, that Elizabeth Vance is no longer capable of managing her own affairs, that she is a danger to herself and to the stability of the family estate, which is intrinsically linked to the corporate entity. The air went out of the room. David stared at the folder as if it were a snake. Declare her incompetent. My own mother. Chloe laughed, a short, ugly sound. She declared war, David, when she said number, when she looked at me in my own home and refused to be reasonable. This isn't about a mother and a son anymore. This is a business transaction, and she is a liability. The court will see this for what it is, David said, but his voice was weak. He was looking for an out, an honourable retreat that didn't exist. The court will see a concerned son and daughter-in-law trying to protect their matriarch, Marcus corrected smoothly. They'll see medical testimony. They'll see a woman in her 70s, recently widowed, exhibiting erratic behaviour. They'll see a legal document, signed and notarized. We will frame this as an act of love, an act of protection. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. But it will be an act of containment. We get the court order, we get control of her assets, her decisions, everything. She signs the Silver Meadows paperwork because she has no other choice. The house is sold. The leak, whoever is behind it, becomes irrelevant because the source of the instability your mother is neutralized. Publicly. It's a clean, decisive solution. David looked at the folder. He thought of his father's disappointment, the weight of his legacy. He thought of the falling stock price, the whispers he'd hear in the country club. He saw his future, the one he was promised, slipping away because of an old woman's sudden, inexplicable defiance. What if she fights it? He asked, a final, weak protest. Chloe walked over to him, placing a hand on his arm. Her touch was cold. Then we let her fight. We let her get on a stand and try to explain her secret life to a judge. We let the world see the crazy old woman we're trying so desperately to help. It will be a humiliation she won't recover from. Either way, David, we win. He looked at her, at the absolute certainty in her eyes. He saw the same ruthless fire he'd once admired in his father. He took a deep breath, the stale, air-conditioned air of the office filling his lungs. All right, he said, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. Draw up the papers. 1. The process server was a young man, barely older than Ava, with a nervous energy that didn't suit the gravity of his task. He found Elizabeth in her garden, kneeling amongst her roses, her hands covered in soil. For a moment, she looked just as they wanted her to appear. A fragile, elderly widow, lost in her memories and her flowers. "Elizabeth Vance?" he asked, his voice wavering slightly. Elizabeth looked up, her eyes clear and sharp. She didn't stand. She simply watched him, her silence a challenge. "I have a delivery for you. From the county court." He held out the thick manila envelope. Elizabeth slowly, deliberately pulled off her gardening gloves, dusting the soil from her fingers. She took the papers from his outstretched hand. She didn't open them. She didn't need to. She knew exactly what they were. It was the public declaration of war. An attempt to erase her, to label her as a ghost before she was even gone. She met the young man's eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice calm, without a tremor of fear or anger. "You can tell them I've received it." He stammered a goodbye and practically fled, leaving Elizabeth alone with the legal papers in one hand and a freshly pruned rose in the other. She looked down at the envelope, then back at the magnificent, sprawling house behind her. Robert's prison, Chloe's prize, David's inheritance. She let out a slow, steady breath. They thought this was the killing blow. They had no idea it was merely the opening salvo in a war she had been planning for 15 years. The next leak wasn't a trickle. It was a flood. 2 days later, a comprehensive dossier appeared on a niche financial news site, a place known for its ruthless analysis. It detailed the disastrous development and subsequent cover-up of Vance Core, a failed composite material from 7 years prior. The project had cost the company nearly $100 million, a fact skillfully buried in accounting ledgers and non-disclosure agreements. The leak included internal memos, projections signed by Robert Vance himself, and a final damning report from the lead engineer who was quietly fired a month later. The market didn't just react. It panicked. The story wasn't about a past environmental misstep anymore. It was about a pattern of deception, originating from the very top. Vance Innovations' stock didn't just tumble, it plummeted. Another 12% evaporated in a matter of hours. The phone calls to David's office were relentless. Investors, board members, analysts all demanding answers. His carefully constructed world of stability and legacy was crumbling around him. "We have to call an emergency meeting," he told Chloe that night, his face pale, his voice hoarse. "Virtual. First thing in the morning. We need to get in front of this." Chloe was pouring a very large glass of wine. "And say what?" "Sorry, our company was built on lies. But please trust me. The son of the liar-in-chief. To fix it, I'll talk about a new era of transparency," David said, pacing his home office. "I'll talk about my father's vision, but my modern approach. I'll reassure them. We're still strong. The fundamentals are strong. Plastics is strong." "Plastics." Chloe swirled her wine, a bitter smile on her face. "The golden goose. Let's hope no one finds a crack in that egg, darling." The next morning, the faces of the Vance Innovations board filled the large screen in David's office. They were a gallery of grim, wealthy men and 2 women, their virtual backgrounds showing sterile corporate offices or tastefully decorated studies. They looked like a firing squad waiting for the condemned. David, dressed in his most authoritative suit, launched into his speech. He was a portrait of strained confidence. He spoke of his father's indomitable spirit, the bedrock of the company. He used words like restructure, synergy, and forward-looking leadership. He promised a full internal audit, a new commitment to corporate honesty. It was a decent performance, filled with all the right platitudes. He was just reaching his crescendo, the part about a stronger, more resilient future. And so, I promise you, with my hand on the helm, Vance Innovations will not only weather this storm, it will emerge stronger than ever before. My father's legacy, he was cut off. Not by a question, but by the calm, authoritative voice of the chairman, Arthur Kensington, an old guard industrialist who had been on the board for 30 years. David. David. Thank you. Arthur's face was unreadable. We appreciate your reassurances. However, something has just come to my attention. A rather significant development. A murmur rippled through the virtual squares on the screen. David felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Arthur, what is it? We have just been notified by our transfer agent of a change in share ownership, Arthur said. His words slow and deliberate, each one landing like a hammer blow. A massive block of shares, the Miller block, was just acquired in a private transaction. It seems an entity known as Phoenix Holdings has been buying up stock quietly for some time. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. As of 5 minutes ago, they have crossed the threshold. Phoenix Holdings now controls 51% of Vance Innovations. Silence. Utter, profound silence. David's mouth was dry. He could hear the blood pounding in his ears. 51%. Controlling interest. It wasn't possible. Arthur cleared his throat. Their representative has invoked their right as majority shareholder and wishes to address the board. Now, all eyes, a dozen pairs of them from around the country, were fixed on the main screen, waiting. David stared. His breath caught in his chest. He imagined a ruthless corporate raider, some shark from a New York hedge fund, appearing on screen to tear apart his father's life's work. A new window popped into the center of the Zoom call. The nameplate read simply, E. Vance. Oh, Grasden. It wasn't a man in a suit. It was his mother. But it was not the mother he knew. She wasn't in the sun-drenched kitchen of the Austin house. She was seated in a command chair, surrounded by an array of monitors displaying complex data streams and stock tickers. The lighting was cool, clinical. Behind her, servers hummed with a quiet, immense power. She wore a simple, dark blazer, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. Her face was calm, resolute, her eyes holding a power he had never seen before. It was the face of a queen taking her throne. A wave of confusion washed over the board members. Whispers could be heard on unmuted microphones. Is that Elizabeth? What is going on? Elizabeth looked directly into her camera, her gaze seeming to penetrate the screen and fix on each and every one of them. Her voice, when she spoke, was not the soft, gentle tone of a grandmother. It was steady, clear, and absolutely commanding. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Ladies. David felt a disbelieving laugh bubble up in his throat. It came out as a choked gasp. Chloe, who was standing just out of frame of his camera, moved closer, her eyes wide with shock. Elizabeth's gaze flickered for a fraction of a second, as if finding David's window on her own screen. My name is Elizabeth Vance. She paused, letting her name hang in the air. The name they had tried to strip of all power. Some of you, however, may know me as Athena. The name meant nothing to the board, but it hit David like a physical blow. Athena, the anonymous source, the ghost in the machine, who had been systematically dismantling his world. It was her. It was all her. Before anyone could process the shock, Elizabeth's command center was replaced by a shared screen. The image was of a document. It was a page from a notebook. The paper yellowed with age. The handwriting was a neat, elegant cursive. There were complex chemical formulas, diagrams of molecular chains, and notes scrawled in the margins. At the top of the page, a date was clearly visible, the 17th of October, 1,980. For the past 2 weeks, Elizabeth's voice continued, a calm narration over the stunning evidence. You have been concerned about the stability of this company, the foundation of this company. For 45 years, that foundation has been a product called plastics. She scrolled to the next page of the notebook. More formulas, more detailed notes on biodegradability and tensile strength. This, she said, her voice ringing with the clarity of undeniable truth, is the original laboratory journal detailing the invention of that product. My laboratory journal. She then brought up a second document side by side with her journal. It was a digital copy of the official patent for plastics, filed by Robert Vance. The filing date was clearly visible. The 22nd of April, 1981. 6 months after her final journal entry. I am the inventor of plastics, Elizabeth stated, her voice as solid as granite. She closed the screen share, her face once again filling the main window. She looked directly at them, the architect of their ruin and their salvation. And as of 10 minutes ago, I am the majority shareholder of this company. Pandemonium. The Zoom call erupted into a cacophony of voices. Arthur Kensington was shouting for order. Other board members were talking over each other, their faces a mixture of astonishment, anger, and dawning comprehension. But David was silent. He was frozen, his mind a black hole of disbelief. His father, a thief, his entire life, his name, the company, all built on a lie. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. He stared at his mother's face on the screen, this stranger in her place, this calm, powerful, avenging angel, and he felt the floor drop out from beneath him. And then, another voice cut through the chaos. It was shrill, ugly, and full of raw, unadulterated fury. It was Chloe. She had shoved her way in front of David's camera, her face contorted, the mask of the sophisticated corporate wife completely shattered. You! She shrieked, her voice cracking, broadcasting her meltdown to the entire leadership of Vance Innovations. You senile, vindictive witch! You sat in that house playing the poor, helpless widow while you were plotting this? David tried to pull her back, whispering, Chloe, no, stop. But she was beyond reason. She's a liar! Chloe screamed into the microphone, her eyes wild. Look at her! This is what she does. She manipulates. She lies. She's a monster who should be locked away in a home. We have papers. We filed them. She's mentally incompetent. She's insane. Her tirade continued, a torrent of insults and accusations. She called Elizabeth every name she could think of, her voice getting higher and more hysterical with every word. She accused her of trying to destroy Robert's legacy out of spite, of being a bitter, jealous old woman. The board members fell silent again, watching this complete and utter self-immolation with a kind of horrified fascination. This wasn't a business dispute anymore. It was a grotesque family drama, playing out on the most public of stages. The recording light on the meeting software was a small, blinking red eye, capturing every single damning word. Elizabeth simply waited. She didn't flinch. She didn't react. She let Chloe's poison exhaust itself, letting her hang herself with her own words. When the screaming finally subsided into ragged, sobbing breaths and David finally managed to pull a spent Chloe away from the camera, a profound, ringing silence fell over the meeting. Into that silence, Elizabeth spoke again, her voice cutting through the tension like a surgeon's scalpel. My first action as majority shareholder, she stated, each word precise and final, is to call for a vote of no confidence in our current CEO, David Vance. David looked up, his face a canvas of pure horror. He was no longer just the son of a thief. He was the next domino to fall. Elizabeth's eyes, cold and unflinching, then moved to another square on the screen, where a pale, sweating Marcus Thorne sat in his mahogany office. "My second action," she continued, "is to inform Mr. Marcus Thorne that my legal team, which is far more capable than he is, will be filing suit against him and his firm for conspiracy, fraud, and professional misconduct for his role in this decades-long deception and his recent malicious attempt to have me declared incompetent. I trust you have excellent liability insurance, Marcus." Marcus Thorne looked like he had been turned to stone. But Elizabeth wasn't finished. The corporate execution was complete. What came next was designed for something far more personal. It was designed for the complete and total psychological annihilation of her son. "Before we proceed to the vote," she said, her voice softening almost imperceptibly, though it held no warmth, only a chilling surgical pity, "there is one final piece of business, one final truth that this board, and you, David, need to understand." She gestured to someone off screen. "I believe you all know Eleanor Croft," she said. "My husband's personal secretary for over 30 years. Another video file appeared on the screen. It wasn't a document this time. It was a woman. Eleanor Croft, now in her late 60s, sat in a comfortable-looking armchair. Her face was lined with a gentle sadness. This wasn't a corporate video. It was a deposition, sworn and videotaped. The date stamp in the corner was from 1 week ago. "Please state your name for the record," a calm, off-screen voice said. "Eleanor May Croft," she replied, her voice soft but clear. "And what was your relationship with Robert Vance?" Eleanor took a deep, shaky breath. "I was his executive secretary at Vance Innovations from 1979 until his retirement. I was also his mistress for 35 of those years." A collective gasp went through the board members. David felt like the air had been punched from his lungs. He could only stare, dumbfounded, at the screen. The off-screen lawyer's voice was gentle. "Miss Croft, did Robert Vance ever discuss the origins of the plastics formula with you?" "He told me everything," Eleanor said, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. "He told me the night it happened, how his brilliant wife, Elizabeth, had created it, how he knew it was worth billions. He told me about the fire in her little lab, how he arranged it. He said it was necessary, that she wouldn't have known what to do with it, that he was the only one with the vision to build an empire." The camera held on Eleanor's face. She looked tired, as if the weight of this secret had finally broken her. "And what did he do with the profits from that empire, Miss Croft? The profits from Elizabeth's invention?" This was it, the final, twisted truth. Eleanor looked directly into the camera, her gaze seeming to find David across time and space. "He supported us," she said simply. "He bought me a house in California. He paid for my son's education. For his life." The off-screen voice pressed. "Your son? Can you state his name for the record?" "His name is Robert Vance, Jr., Eleanor said, her voice trembling with a mixture of sorrow and a strange, quiet pride. "He was the son Robert always wanted. He told me so. He said David was a disappointment, that he was weak, a pale reflection. He said David was his mother's son, not his." The video ended. The screen went black, but the images remained, burned into David's mind. A second family, a second son. A lifetime of profits from his mother's stolen genius, funneled not to them, not to him, but to a secret life he never knew existed. His father hadn't just betrayed his mother, he had erased David. The love he had spent his entire life trying to earn, the approval he craved, had never been on the table. It had all gone to another boy, another Robert Vance. His inheritance wasn't just gone, his identity, his past. The very foundation of who he was. The revered son of the great Robert Vance was. A lie. A cruel, elaborate fiction. He wasn't the heir to an empire. He was the son of a thief, and a man who held him in contempt. He slowly sank into his chair, not seeing the shocked faces of the board, not hearing the muted chaos that was surely still unfolding. He saw only his father's face, not as the titan he remembered, but as a ghost, a fraud, laughing at him from beyond the grave. The war was over. His mother hadn't just won. She had vaporized the battlefield. It happened faster than a market crash, because it was won. The moment the Zoom call ended, a void of absolute silence filled the boardroom. It was the silence of a dynasty drawing its last breath. Then, the digital world, which had been watching, listening, erupted. Before anyone in that room could even formulate a sentence, a dozen phones buzzed in unison. The first clip to hit the internet wasn't Elizabeth's calm declaration. It was Chloe's. A 10-second snippet, raw and pixelated, shot on a phone pointed at a monitor. Her face twisted in a mask of pure rage, screaming, "You old hag! You venomous, lying witch!" It landed on Twitter without context and became a meme in under 60 seconds. Number, boardroom banshee. Then, Ava made her move. She didn't just leak a clip. She executed a kill shot. Her private TikTok account, at Case Study 72, suddenly went public. The profile picture, once a generic grey icon, was now a photo of a young, smiling Elizabeth from the 1970s holding a chemistry beaker. The bio was updated. The case is closed. The truth is out. This is for my grandmother, the real architect. The first video she posted was a simple screen recording of the Vance Innovation stock ticker, the green numbers turning blood red and plummeting in real time. The audio was the song Burning Down the House. It got 1 million views in an hour. The second video was a montage. It began with the clip of Chloe's tirade, then cut to David's ashen, uncomprehending face. It spliced in photos of the lavish funeral, the opulent house. Then it cut to the documents. Ava's calm, steady voice narrated over screen-captured images of the fraudulent power of attorney, highlighting the notary's name, Marcus Thorne, Robert Vance's personal lawyer. It showed the original scientific paper Elizabeth had written, the one that had been mysteriously retracted. It laid out the dates, the patents, the lies, with the cold, irrefutable precision of a legal brief. And it ended with the most powerful image of all, the final frame of the board meeting, Elizabeth Vance, a ghost in the machine, looking directly into the camera, her face serene, her voice clear. "I am Atina." The video was titled, "They Tried to Bury Her. They Didn't Know She Was a Seed." Number Vance. Vindication. The hashtag didn't just trend. It broke the internet. Number Vance Vindication was everywhere. It was on Facebook, shared by outraged women's groups and business ethics watchdogs. It was dissected on Reddit forums, where amateur sleuths were already digging up more dirt on Marcus Thorne and Vance Innovation's history. It was the lead story on every news network, an unbelievable corporate coup and family drama unfolding in Austin, Texas. A CNN anchor said, her face a mixture of shock and professional glee, a 72-year-old woman, presumed to be a grieving widow, has single-handedly dismantled the multi-billion-dollar empire she secretly built. On a business channel, a panel of analysts was in a frenzy. The stock is in freefall. We haven't seen a deliberate targeted takedown like this since ever. She used their own greed against them, waited for the perfect moment, and executed a corporate decapitation. Athena! My God, it's brilliant. It's terrifying. The social commentary was even more intense. Think pieces appeared overnight. The Invisible Woman's Revenge. Athena, a modern Medea, reclaims her fire. Why every woman is cheering for Elizabeth Vance. She wasn't just a wronged wife. She became a symbol, a hero for every person who had ever been silenced, erased, or underestimated. For Chloe, the fallout was a social guillotine. Her phone melted down with calls, not of support, but of condemnation from the very high society friends she had cultivated so carefully. The video of her screaming was inescapable. She was no longer the glamorous, powerful wife of a CEO. She was a shrew, a caricature of entitlement, a laughingstock. The invitations to galas vanished. The charity boards she sat on requested her immediate resignation via curt, formal emails. Her personal brand, built on a foundation of her husband's name and money, evaporated in a puff of digital smoke. She didn't wait for the financial ruin to be finalized. She was a pragmatist, a predator, and she knew a sinking ship when she was on it. She found David in his father's study, staring at the empty stock ticker on his screen, the red line flat at the bottom, like a dead man's EKG. He hadn't moved in hours. She didn't speak. She just started grabbing things. A small, priceless painting off the wall. A set of antique silver decanters. She moved with a frantic, desperate energy. David watched her, his eyes glassy. "Chloe?" he finally whispered. His voice was a dry rattle. She turned, her face hard, all traces of the screaming hysteric gone, replaced by icy resolve. "Don't you Chloe me. David. Don't you dare." And fro. She walked over to the desk and dropped a stack of her own designer luggage on the polished wood with a loud thud. "You're finished," she said, her voice low and venomous. "We're finished. Do you understand me? You let that old woman destroy us. You were weak. Your father was right about you. You've always been weak. She took everything." David stammered, looking at his hands as if they belonged to a stranger. "No," Chloe sneered, zipping a bag full of jewelry with a savage pull. "She took your everything. What I had, I borrowed, and the loan's been called in." She picked up her purse. "My lawyer will be in touch with your lawyer." "Oh, wait. Your lawyer is about to be disbarred and possibly imprisoned." "That's a shame." She gave a short, ugly laugh. "Figure it out, David. You're on your own." She didn't look back as she walked out of the study, her heels clicking a death march on the marble floors of the house that was no longer hers. The front door slammed shut, the sound echoing through the cavernous, empty space. David didn't flinch. He just sat there as the empire of Vance fell to ruin around him, a king of ashes. Meanwhile, a formal notice was delivered to the offices of Marcus Thorne. It was from the State Bar. An emergency suspension of his license pending a full investigation. The DA's office had already convened a grand jury. The charges would include fraud, conspiracy, and perjury. His carefully constructed life of quiet, lucrative corruption was over. The ghost in the machine had claimed him, too. The name Vance, once a symbol of Texan industry and power, was now a synonym for fraud, theft, and disgrace. A story told in hashtags and memes. A legacy destroyed in a single, perfectly executed digital storm. A week passed. The storm of media attention didn't subside. It mutated. Documentaries were already in production. Books were being pitched. The house, once a symbol of power, now had news vans parked outside it day and night, their cameras trained on the closed gates like vultures waiting for a carcass. Inside, the silence was absolute. The staff had been let go. The clocks seemed to have stopped. It was a tomb, and Elizabeth was its sole, living occupant. She moved through the rooms, not with triumph, but with a quiet, methodical purpose, dismantling the last vestiges of her prison. The heavy, ornate furniture Robert had chosen was covered in white sheets. The portraits of him, of his father, were taken down, leaving pale rectangles on the silk-covered walls. She worked alone, her movements slow and deliberate. The doorbell rang. The sound was a shock, a violation of the profound quiet. Through the security monitor, she saw him. David. He looked like a stranger. The tailored suit was gone, replaced by a wrinkled shirt and jeans. He was gaunt, his face shadowed with a week's worth of stubble. His eyes, once full of a weak, inherited arrogance, were now just empty, hollowed out. He wasn't a CEO. He wasn't a Vance. He was just a man who had lost everything, including his own story. She buzzed him in. He walked into the grand foyer, now draped in white like a mausoleum, and looked around. He seemed smaller in the vast space, diminished. He finally looked at her, standing by the bottom of the grand staircase. He didn't seem to have the strength to be angry. "Hello, David," she said. Her voice wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. It was neutral, the voice of a witness. He swallowed, his throat dry. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for the company. He didn't rage or plead. The fight had gone out of him completely. He stood there for a long moment, the silence stretching between them, thick with unspoken history. Finally he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Why?" It was the only question that mattered. Not why did you take the company, but why the silence? Why the deception? Why let him live his entire life as a lie? Elizabeth didn't offer him a seat. She didn't offer him comfort. She met his gaze and held it. "Because you never asked," she said, her voice clear and precise. "Not once in your 45 years did you ever look at me, truly look at me, and ask if I was happy. You never asked what my life was like before your father. You never asked why the woman who raised you seemed like a ghost in her own home. You saw what you wanted to see, David. A mother, a prop, a part of the scenery that came with the house." He flinched, the truth a physical blow. He took a staggering step forward, his hands slightly raised as if in supplication. Did you ever love him?" The question hung in the air, desperate. He needed one thing to be real, one part of the foundation to be true. Elizabeth's expression didn't soften. There would be no easy absolution here. "I loved the man I thought he was," she said, her voice dropping, taking on a chillingly intimate tone. "For about 6 months in 1979, the man who seemed fascinated by my mind, the man who listened to my ideas about polymer chemistry and told me I was brilliant." Her eyes hardened. That man disappeared the week after he proposed. He was replaced by a thief, a man who looked at my fire and didn't want to share its warmth. He wanted to own the flame, so he stole it, and then he spent the next 45 years trying to extinguish what was left of me. She watched him, her gaze unwavering. "You want to know if I loved your father?" "No, David. I despised him. I despised his greed, his casual cruelty. I despised the way he looked at you with disappointment, because you weren't the predator he was. And I despised the way you tried so desperately to become that predator to win his approval." Tears welled in David's eyes, hot and shameful. He shook his head, a gesture of pure denial. I worshipped him. He was my father. He was a brand." Elizabeth corrected him, her voice like ice. "Vance. A name he polished with my stolen work. He built this family on a lie, David. He built this house on a lie. He built you on a lie. A lie you were more than happy to benefit from. You stood by while your wife called me a parasite in my own home. You threatened me with a nursing home. You tried to have me declared incompetent so you could sell my prison and pocket the profits. You were his son, all right. Not in strength, but in complicity. You saw the bars on my cage your entire life, and you did nothing but help your father keep the lock turned. Each word was a stone, and they were burying him." He sank to his knees on the marble floor, the sound sharp and pathetic in the echoing hall. Sobs racked his body. Not loud or dramatic, but quiet, broken sounds of a man utterly destroyed. He wasn't crying for the money or the company. He was crying for the loss of a memory, for the father who never was, for the life he now saw as a complete and utter fraud. Elizabeth watched him, her face a mask of stone. There was no pity in her eyes, no satisfaction. There was only the quiet finality of a long overdue reckoning. She let him cry for a full minute, the sounds filling the dead air. Then she spoke again, her voice cutting through his grief. "Get up, David." He looked up, his face streaked with tears. "Get up," she repeated, her tone leaving no room for argument. He struggled to his feet, unsteady. "You have nothing," she stated, not as a taunt, but as a fact. "The Vance name is worthless. The money is gone. The legacy is a pile of ash." She took a step closer, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of something in her eyes. It wasn't hatred. It was something far more complex. "He built this family on a lie," she said, her voice low and powerful. "You must now decide if you will live in its ruins or build something true on your own." She turned and walked towards the study. "The world thinks I am a vengeful old woman. They are not entirely wrong. But my revenge was never about destroying you. It was about freeing myself. And now, I am giving that same freedom to you." She gestured for him to leave. "I am offering you no inheritance, no buyout, no quiet settlement to ease your transition. I am giving you the one thing your father never did, a chance to be your own man, with no safety net and no unearned name to hide behind. I am giving you the difficult, terrifying freedom of a clean slate. It is more than you deserve. It is everything I have to give." David stared at her, his mind struggling to comprehend. A clean slate. It sounded like a death sentence, to start from zero, with the most disgraced name in the country. It was an impossible, cruel mercy. He turned, without another word, and walked out the door she had opened for him. He didn't look back at the house, or at the woman who was his mother. He walked out into the harsh sunlight, a ghost leaving a tomb, with nothing but the crushing weight of a future he had to build from nothing. Elizabeth watched him go, then closed the door, the click of the lock final and absolute. 6 months later, the Austin air was warm, filled with the scent of live oak and the buzz of a new university semester. The prison-like mansion on the hill had been sold to a tech billionaire who promptly had it leveled. Elizabeth had kept nothing from it. The company, Vance Innovations, no longer existed. In its place was Phoenix Chemical, a company rebuilt from the ground up, now a leader in sustainable materials and ethical corporate governance. The stock, after the initial crash and restructuring, was stable and growing. Elizabeth remained the majority shareholder, the silent guiding force, but she had appointed a new CEO, a sharp, innovative woman in her 40s who had been a rising star at a competitor. But Elizabeth wasn't at a corporate office today. She was standing on a stage in the gleaming new science and engineering building of the University of Texas. The room was packed with students, faculty, and press. The atmosphere was one of anticipation and respect. Ava, now in her final year of law school and an intern for the Phoenix Chemical legal team, stood just behind her, a proud, quiet presence. Elizabeth stepped up to the podium. She looked different. The years of tension had fallen away from her face. She wasn't smiling. Not exactly. Her expression was something deeper, more lasting. It was serene. She wore a simple, elegant blue dress, the color of a clear sky. She was no longer a ghost. She was a landmark. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady and clear, amplified through the hall. "For most of my life, I was invisible. I lived in a beautiful house, next to a powerful man, and I faded into the background. It is a story that is not unique to me. It is the story of countless women, women of brilliance, of passion, of fire, who are told their light is too bright, who are told their ideas are mere hobbies, who are silenced, sidelined, and slowly, systematically erased. Ugh! A hush fell over the crowd. The reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks. A fire, once stolen, is not easily reclaimed, she continued, her eyes scanning the faces in the audience, lingering on the young women in the front rows. It takes patience, it takes strategy, and it takes a deep, unshakable belief that your truth is worth fighting for, even if you are the only one who knows it. The events of the last year have been public. A small, wry smile touched her lips. My story has been told and retold, framed as one of revenge. And in some ways, it was. But revenge is a hollow victory if it ends in destruction. Burning down the old house is not enough. You must use the embers to build something new, something better. She paused, taking a sip of water. Today, I am here not to dwell on the ashes of the past, but to plant the seeds of the future. The world knew me for a few weeks as Athena. It was a name I chose for the goddess of wisdom and strategy. But Athena was also the goddess of crafts, of creation. And that is the legacy I choose to build. She looked out at the sea of faces, her voice ringing with purpose. That is why I am here today to announce the endowment of the Elizabeth Vance STEM initiative. A wave of murmurs and applause rippled through the room. My real name was once attached to a legacy of deceit. From this day forward, it will be attached to a legacy of opportunity. This initiative will be a multi-million-dollar scholarship fund dedicated to finding and funding brilliant but underprivileged young women in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. It is for the young woman tinkering in her garage with an idea that could change the world. It is for the student who is told her ambition is unladylike. It is for every mind that has a fire that deserves to be fueled, not extinguished. She gestured to the rows of students. I look out at you, and I see a forest of potential, 1,000 fires waiting to be lit. My life's work was stolen from me because I was a woman, alone and without power. The work of this initiative is to ensure that no other woman with a world-changing idea will ever have to be either of those things again. We will give them the resources. We will build them a community. We will give them the power to protect their own fire. The applause, when it came, was thunderous. It was long and heartfelt. It wasn't for a corporate titan or a wronged woman. It was for an architect, a builder. Elizabeth stepped back from the podium, a serene calm on her face. Ava came to her side and squeezed her hand gently. As the cameras flashed, Elizabeth's gaze drifted past the reporters, past the faculty, to a young woman in the third row. The student had tears in her eyes, her face alight with a mixture of awe and inspiration. In that young woman's face, Elizabeth saw the reflection of her own past, but also the promise of a different future. She had reclaimed her name. She had reclaimed her work. She had reclaimed her life. Her revenge was complete. Not because she had destroyed the men who wronged her, but because she had created a legacy that would outlive them all. A legacy that would build and protect and burn brightly for generations to come. The fire was hers again, and this time she was sharing it with the world.